No young kid growing up ever dreams of someday becoming a businessman. He wants to be a fireman, a sponsored athlete, or a forest ranger. The Koch brothers and Donald Trumps of the business world are heroes to no one except other businessmen with similar values. I wanted to be a fur trapper when I grew up. My father was a tough French Canadian from Quebec. Papa completed only 3 years of schooling before he had to begin working on the family farm at the age of 9. Because he was the hardest worker of 9 siblings, when he was 10 years old, he was chosen by his father to go to Maine with him and begin working in a mill. In later years, he worked as a journeyman plasterer, carpenter, electrician, and plumber. Not bad for a third-grade education. In Lisbon, Maine, where I was born, he learned to repair the looms at the Warumbo woolen mill. I believe I inherited his love of hard physical work and an appreciation of quality, particularly of fine tools. One of the profound memories of my early childhood was seeing him sitting in the kitchen next to the wood-burning stove, drinking a bottle of whiskey, and proceeding to pull out some of his teeth, both good and bad, with his electrician's pliers. He needed dentures, but thought the local dentist was asking too much money for the part of the job he could just as easily do himself. I think I must have learned to climb before I could walk. Father Chouinard, who lived upstairs in a house we were renting, encouraged me to crawl up the stairs, where I was rewarded with a spoonful of honey. When I was about 6, my brother Gerald took me out fishing and sneaked a 10-inch pickerel onto the end of the line and made believe I caught it. I've been hooked on fishing ever since. Nearly everyone was French-Canadian in Lisbon, and I attended a French-speaking Catholic school until I was 7. My 2 sisters, Doris and Rachel, were 9 and 11 years older, and since my brother was in the military and my father was always working, I was brought up surrounded by women. I have ever since preferred that accommodation. My mother, Yvon, was the adventurous one in the family, and it was her idea to move the family in 1946 to California, where she hoped the dry climate would be better for my father's asthma. We auctioned off all our possessions, including the hand-built furniture my father had made, and one traumatic day, the 6 of us piled into the family Chrysler and drove west. Somewhere along Route 66, we stopped at an Indian hogan, and my mother took out the preserved corn she had put up for the trip and gave it all to a Hopi woman and her hungry children. That incident was probably my first lesson in philanthropy. When we arrived in Burbank, we stayed with another French-Canadian family, and I was put in a public school. I was the smallest kid in the class. I couldn't speak English, and I constantly had to defend myself because I had a girl's name. So I did what any future entrepreneur probably would have done. I ran away. My parents transferred me to a parochial school where I was able to get more help from the nuns. My report card from that year showed D's in every subject. The language and cultural differences made me a loner, and I spent most of my time off by myself. Before the other kids in my neighborhood were even allowed to cross the street on their own, I was bicycling 7 or 8 miles to reach a lake on a private golf course, where I hid in the willows away from the guards and fished for bluegills and bass. Later on, I discovered the urban wilds of Griffith Park and the Los Angeles River, where I spent every day after school gigging frogs, trapping crawdads, and hunting cottontails with my bow and arrow. In the summer, we swam in a foam-filled swimming hole fed by an outflow pipe from the film-developing labs at one of the movie studios. If I ever get cancer, it can probably be traced back to that time. High school was the worst. I had pimples, I couldn't dance, and I had no interest in any of the subjects except for the shop classes. I had an attitude and was always in detention. For being a troublemaker, I often had to write lines like, "I will not," 500 or so times. As a budding entrepreneur, I would take 3 pencils and line them up with sticks and rubber bands so I could do 3 lines at once. I excelled at athletics like baseball and football, but when it came time to perform while people were watching, I would fumble the ball. I learned at an early age that it's better to invent your own game. Then you can always be a winner. I found my games in the ocean, creeks, and hillsides surrounding Los Angeles. Math was so boring at times, I'd just stare at the ceiling and try to count all the holes in the perforated soundboard. History class was an opportunity for me to practice holding my breath, so that on weekends I could free dive deeper to catch the abundant abalone and lobster off the Malibu coast. In auto shop class, I would lie on the creeper, slide under the car I was working on, and come out only to check out the legs on the cute girl who came to take the role. Some fellow misfits, along with adults like Robert Climbs, a music teacher, and Tom Cade, a graduate student at UCLA, started the Southern California Falconry Club, where we trained hawks and falcons for hunting. Every weekend in the spring, we went off looking for hawk nests. Sometimes we banded the young for the government, or we took a young hawk to train. Our club was responsible for enacting the first falconry regulations in California. It was the most formative time of my life. When a 15-year-old has to trap a wild goshawk, stay up all night with her until the bird finally develops enough trust to fall asleep on his fist, and then train the proud bird using only positive reinforcement. Well, the Zen master would have to ask, just who is getting trained here?